Amen. What a great way to get into God's Word this morning. Welcome to Oxford Bible Fellowship. My name is Garrett Nates. I'm the lead pastor here. If you're visiting with us, it's great to have you here with us. I want to also recognize we got a lot of children here in the room with us, and so it's great to have our children with us. The littlest ones are downstairs, but first graders are with us, and so it's okay if it's a little bit noisy at certain times in the service. That's okay with me, and as long as it's okay with you. So grab a Bible, turn to Isaiah chapter 9. We've been going through this series called Renewing Joy. Isaiah 9 can be found on page 331 of the Bible that's in front of you. And by the way, if you come here this morning and you don't have a Bible, and you need a Bible, you'd like one, you can take that this morning with you as you leave. We'd love to have you walk out of this room with a gift of a scripture in your hands. Well, Merry Christmas to you. Every year, there's these lists that come out of the most popular gifts. And from Forbes magazine to all sorts of other places that list, what are the top gifts every single year. This year, in 2017, some of the gifts that make the top are drones. I wonder if anyone's going to get a drone tomorrow morning. Virtual reality is coming back. Or again, it's still here, right? What's virtual reality? Tickle Me Elmo for the kids. I know, right? Oh no. Someone said, oh no. No, tickle me Elmo. It's true though, right? All these great gifts that are on the list are the best Christmas gifts. Not every gift, though, ends up living up to what it's cracked up to be. Many of the gifts that we buy for our children, that we receive, fail to meet the expectations that we have for them. Maybe a couple years ago, you bought yourself a Samsung Galaxy Note 7. You want to buy one of those? And also, did someone just boo? It caught on fire, right? And then what about hoverboards? Hoverboards were a pretty big deal a couple years ago, and some of them spontaneously exploding. I watched videos this week of hoverboards just exploding out of the blue. Some of the gifts we buy, some of the gifts we get, don't exactly meet the expectations that we have for them, or we think they should be for us. Many of the gifts that I bought for my children over the years are not durable. They instantly fall apart. You know, those remote control cars, with those the gadgets that we have, and they just all of a sudden, after a couple of days, they stop working. All of those things remind us that there's something deep inside of us that we want something that's going to last forever. A gift that when we receive it, won't wear out, won't spontaneously explode. We want something that's going to last forever. Today we're talking about a gift that will last forever. A gift that will satisfy every single desire that you have in your life. It is a 3-letter gift. J-O-Y. You thought it was going to be Jesus, didn't you? Yeah. Joy. It is the gift of joy. And here on this Christmas Eve, this morning here, what I want to do is orientate our hearts in the right direction, because it's very easy for us to get distracted. It's very easy for us to look for things in this world that we think are going to bring us joy, and yet they don't live up to that expectation. They don't result in that for us. And so this passage that we're looking at this morning in Isaiah chapter 9, what we understand is that joy doesn't come from a gadget, a gizmo, or a game, but it comes from a child. Hopefully by now you're in Isaiah chapter 9. Let's read these verses for us. We're going to be focusing this morning on verse 7, but I'm going to read for us verse 1 down to verse 7. For the past weeks we've been unpacking these, and so I just want to read it in context. Page 331. Bible in front of you, starting in verse 1 of chapter 9. This is what Isaiah writes. He says this: "But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them his light shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior, battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, To us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Amazing passage, isn't it? And as I said, we've been unpacking for the past couple of weeks. Today we're focusing on just one verse, verse 7. But just to remind us of the context, we know that what's been happening so far in Isaiah is that Isaiah has been prophesying at the beginning of chapter 8 that Israel is going to be taken captive by the Assyrian nation. And so we looked at the end of chapter 8, verse 22. It's doom and gloom. They are going to be taken away in exile out of their land by this Assyrian nation due to their sin, their rebellion. They are now being exiled, taken out of their land. But as we come to verse 1, you heard it begin with the word but. He says, but there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. And then going down to verse 3, he says that there will be an increase of joy. How can this be? How can it be? How can Isaiah sit here at this point in their life and say, hey everybody, it's going to get really bad. You're going to go through a dark valley of life. You're going to be taken away into exile. But there will be no gloom. There will be a day when that gloom will be reversed. You see, Isaiah's confidence is soaring. He's so certain that he speaks of these things as if they have already taken place. And so he's speaking in such a way that, yes, they're going to go through the valley, but that he knows that God is so good that he knows that it's not always going to be doom and gloom because there will be a child who will come and he will be there to reverse all of these things. It begs the question for us, what is joy? What is joy? Is it possible to be joyful when everything in life seems to suggest a different emotional response? How can Isaiah call them to joy knowing that they're going to be going through circumstances that are so difficult, so trying, so challenging? How can he say joy to them? We have to have a different definition of joy. Joy, as we defined it a couple weeks ago, you probably don't remember, and that's fine, because I had to remind myself this week of how I defined it. Joy is an emotional response of contentment and elation in God that transcends circumstances. I'll say that again because it's helpful for us to understand that joy is an emotional response. It is emotion. And the emotion is contentment. And the emotion is elation. And those are in God that transcends circumstances, which means it lives above circumstances. Because that joy is rooted not in changing circumstances, things that are difficult and challenging and changing and unstable. The challenge there is for us to find an emotional response to who God is. And so yes, Israel is going to go through darkness because of their sin, but it is into this dark backdrop that comes this bright light of God's redemption and God's salvation. Now you and I, you are not facing the same threat that the Israelites were facing. We're not living under the threat of some foreign army coming in and taking us into exile. That's not our reality, but the reality is that the consequences of our sin are no less severe. Our sin means that you and I are dwelling in a land of deep darkness, living in the shadows of light, separated from God, cut off from the source of life himself. And so yes, we're not under captivity from Assyrians, but we are living into the captivity of our sin. And we're in bondage to that. But there is a solution and an answer to that darkness. And on Christmas, a light can shine into the darkness of your life. The luminous light of Christ exposes sin and leads us to salvation. And so this promise of a Messiah that Isaiah makes for them, it was their hope, but it is our hope today too, that God will make due on his promise to send a Messiah who will save us from our sins and lead us into the light of salvation. God has fulfilled his promise. This is true Christmas joy. That God has done what he said he would do, what he said he would fulfill. Do you have that kind of joy in your life? A joy that's not rooted in circumstances that will change constantly. Do you have a joy that is rooted in a person who will not change, who has not changed, and never will change? That is where the joy comes from. Here's the big idea I want us to see from verse 7 this morning. You can put this up on the screen back there. It is this, that God eagerly pursues the renewal of our joy by giving us the gifts that satisfy every human desire. And I want to unpack that sentence for just a few minutes in our time we have together this morning. God eagerly pursues the renewal of your joy. Let's look at verse 7, the last sentence of verse 7. It says this, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. God eagerly pursues the renewal of your joy. Now that statement alone, if you just let that sentence just sit with you for just a minute, that sentence is maybe startling to some of you this morning. It startles me this week as I thought about that, of like, that God eagerly pursues the renewal of my joy. But that's essentially what this last sentence of verse 7 is saying. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Some of us have a very different view of God. That God is out to take our joy. That God is somehow this senile, grumpy, old grandpa sitting up in the clouds looking for somehow to take our joy. That his happiness is wrapped up somehow in my misery. And somehow people experience God in their life. God is a cosmic killjoy. Obeying God makes us unhappy. You ever met someone like that in your life? That the idea of God is just a downer for them. That it's as if it's this heavy burden of who God is. It is a killjoy. Verse 7 rewinds all of that faulty view. It may come last in the section we're looking at, but that sentence there, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this, is the most weighty sentence as it describes God. And what it tells us is that He is zealous. The zeal of the Lord of hosts. Now, you and I don't use the word zeal very often. If we do ever use zeal, it's about a person getting too excited. Maybe you think, I'm too excited this morning. He's just too zealous, you know. He's a fanatic. He's a religious fanatic. He's overzealous. Zeal, though, is a common word in the Bible. So I'll give you a couple references. Proverbs chapter 6. Zeal is used to describe a husband's jealous love for his wife. That's good, isn't it? If you're married, I hope that your husband has a jealous love for you. Song of Songs goes on deeper for that. Describes the love that burns in the heart of a bride and a groom. It's a zealous love. It burns there. Ecclesiastes 4 tells us that zeal is used to describe an envy that drives human effort. It's an interesting word. If we looked at the word itself in the way it's used in the context here, it actually means to become intensely red. Carries with it a color. So it's the idea of color, kind of flooding a person's face, flushing with the rush of deep emotion that is just kind of brimming within. And it's not anger, it is passion. This is the word for zeal, pursuing something with vigor, focus, drive, and with force. A very, very human word. We might better use the word passion. That very human word describes, there in verse 7, God's passion. God is not a cosmic killjoy. He's not grumpy. He burns with passion. So we could say that God's face is flushed with red, hot emotion and passion. Later in Isaiah, well, you can put this through later if you want to. This is Isaiah 40-13. It compares God to a warrior, psyching himself up before the battle. That's why we sang a mighty warrior before I preached this morning. Our great commander, a mighty warrior. We've all seen kind of the pregame locker room speeches, right? And the coach is kind of pumping up their athletes. Just let's go, you know. Football players do some weird things sometimes to pump themselves up for games. In Isaiah 42, it almost describes God that way, stirring up his zeal, getting pumped up, getting psyched himself. Isaiah 63 describes the surge of emotions within God's very being. Other places in Zephaniah and the Psalm describes God's passion burning like a fire. And in Deuteronomy and Hebrews, we learn that God himself is a consuming fire. It's not too far a stretch of imagination to say that God is on fire. Because he's surging with emotions. And all of that is wrapped up in that little phrase that we can gloss over on Christmas Eve morning and just jump to something else, and we forget about the fact that it is the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Well, what's this? What is this? What is he so passionate about? What is he pursuing with force and drive with zeal? It is nothing more than restoring the joy of Israel out of the darkness of their life, sending a child who would restore them. And this is that God eagerly and passionately, aggressively, like a warrior, comes into the world as a child. And he does so to renew your joy. He does so to renew you. So meek and mild Jesus is also mighty and passionate Jesus. A little tiny baby crying in a manger scene that we think is so peaceful. Yes, it is peaceful, but at the same time, it is a child who comes pumped up, psyched up, to do this, to restore joy. Let me help us understand this a little bit more. There is no one who seeks your joy more than God. Nobody. You may think you pursue your joy. You may think you want to be joyful. You may think that you know how to get joy. But there is nobody in all of eternity who wants your joy more than God. He passionately, eagerly pursues your joy because he knows that your enjoyment of him is going to bring glory to him. He is supremely worthy. And therefore he gives you the best gift. He gives us himself. Because our joy is wrapped up in him. Not the things of this world, not the circumstances of this world. Friends, I had to stand before you this morning and tell you, I believe in a God who is full of passion for my joy. I want to be happy in life. I want to be joyful in life. I think you probably do too. But sometimes I don't know how to get it. And so I have to go to these verses that tell me that the zeal of the Lord of hosts knows how to bring me joy. He knows how to bring you joy. Why settle for something less than what he wants to give you? Why? Let's look at two other things in this passage. Because that builds a foundation. As I said, it comes last, but it is probably the most weighty. That God eagerly pursues the renewal of your joy. Verse 7 also then describes two very specific things that God says, this is how I'm going to renew your joy. And if you look at the verse, there are two kind of repeated ideas. So if you look at the first part of the verse, he says this, of the increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end. And then he kind of repeats the same idea right before that last sentence when he says, from this time forth and forevermore. So there's two things here that how God pursues our joy, things that are going to last forever. It will never run out. There will be no end. From this time forth and forevermore, and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever. These are the things that are going to last forever. And because these are the things that God gives us to renew our joy. The first one is this. God eagerly pursues the renewal of your joy with endless, perfect peace. You see it there. The increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end. One of the ways that God gives us joy is by giving us his peace. We all want peace, don't we? The world we live in is full of wars and rumors of wars, relational conflict, racial tensions, political instability, inner turmoil, and we have a deep sense inside of us that things are not the way they are supposed to be. You and I experience life this way. And so I have my wife, she's going to throw me a soccer ball down here because we love soccer in our house. Some of you know that. You got it. It's all good. You got it. Thanks, babe. Oh, man, that's good. This is one soccer ball in our house. We have lots of soccer balls in our house. Some of us experience life in such a way that we lack peace. Now, the biblical word for peace is shalom. We say that word. You all say it with me. Shalom. 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 The biblical word for peace. When we think of peace, we often think it's the absence of something. So it's the absence of conflict, it's the absence of pain, it's the absence of sickness, it's the absence of noise, quiet, peace and quiet in our home. But the biblical word for peace is actually shalom. And shalom is a different type of word than when we define peace, because shalom actually is not about the absence of something, it's about the wholeness of something. The reason why you and I experience life, we think, wow, things are not the way they're supposed to be, is because we experience life like a deflated soccer ball. This thing is deflated, right? It's not whole. I can't kick this ball, and if I throw it on the ground, it just doesn't go anywhere. That's much how we experience life. We say life is supposed to be whole, it's supposed to be solid, and yet it's a little squishy. There's parts of life that are not whole, they are lacking something. And so to restore shalom to this soccer ball would be to pump it up. So it's no longer soft, but it is full, it is complete. So the biblical word for peace is not just the absence of something, it is the wholeness of something. It is restoring something to how it used to be in life. And so when we restore peace, Jesus, it says here, Isaiah says that Jesus is going to have this unending peaceful reign. He's saying that he's going to restore wholeness to creation. Not just get rid of conflict, not just have a peace and quiet, not just that, but he says wholeness. And so it would be as if there was a pump here that just pumped it up. Thanks, Naomi. You're the best. We have an innate sense that we want things to be pumped up, to be full, to be whole. And so when he says here, the increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end. What he's saying is that this Prince of Peace that we saw in verse 6 will restore shalom, wholeness to life. Not just get rid of conflict, but put everything back right. And as long as you and I seek for peace outside of God's provided means of this child, we will have an innate sense that there's something wrong in life. You and I need that kind of peace in order to be joyful. We don't just need a peace the way the world defines peace. We need the wholeness that comes to us because of the Prince of Peace, who will restore things to the way they were supposed to be. And so when the angels announce peace on earth, the announcement that shalom is now possible because of that child. In Romans 5:1, we also read that therefore we've been justified by faith. We have peace with God. And that peace comes through our Lord Jesus Christ. In Romans 5:1, it's not the peace of God. It's peace with God. And so the peace that you and I want that's going to restore joy is not just a peaceful life of tranquility. A life that says there's no conflict. A life that says it's just, nothing. It's actually a restored relationship with God. That is the shalom that is referenced here. As long as you and I are on this earth, we will have a measure in which we sense things have gone awry. And so as we look at this verse here, we think, how will God restore my joy this year, this Christmas? It is through giving you a wholeness, a relationship with God, through this child. That is the abundant peace. Not peace the way this world defines it. And so God is zealous for your joy. And he does so by giving us his peace. Secondly is this. The middle part of verse 7, it is this, that God eagerly pursues the renewal of your joy with endless perfect leadership. Endless perfect leadership. If you notice the text, Isaiah connects the birth of this child with the promise that God made to King David. Later today, if you desire so, you can read 2 Samuel chapter 7. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, God makes a promise to David that there's going to be a king who will come in his line who will rule forever over this eternal kingdom. Someone from his family would come and establish this type of reign and eternal kingdom. That child that's promised here in verse 6 is the fulfillment of that promise to David. If we look at the Israelites' history, they had been ruled by some very bad kings. We looked at 2 Kings. You read the story of 2 Kings. It tells the story of a long line of kings who did evil in the sight of God. Time and time again, kings would rise to the throne and they would rule evil with evil ways. They would pursue corruption, idolatry, all of these things, and it left a longing in their heart for a perfect king to come, a perfect leader. It left this leadership vacuum from them to say, we want someone who's going to come and rule us rightly. And so what Isaiah prophesies here is that this child is the one that was promised to David after all of these kings who were terrible kings who will come, and now he will rule rightly. Jesus is that endless, perfect leader. The one that they wanted and the one that you and I long for in our life. If you look at verse 7, it tells us that there are two things that make Jesus' perfect leadership. You can see them there. He says this, that he will rule with justice and with righteousness. Jesus' leadership style is just, which very simply means that he always makes right judgments. He always sees things clearly in life. There's nothing that is out of his perfect judgment. He is just. His leadership is also righteous, it says there, which means that his standard of what is right and what is wrong is flawless. He's never wrong with what's right or wrong. He's always on the right side. And so he sees clearly, he judges rightly because he's got the right standard of judgment. He's not stained by the broken condition that you and I have of not being able to make right judgments. His leadership is founded, it says there, and sustained by righteousness and by justice. He is the perfect leader. The one that they've been longing for. The one that you and I long for. Experience tells us that living under good leadership will always increase our joy. I know for me in my life, the people that I've served under and worked with, I've had the privilege of working under some of the most humble, godly leaders in my life. And going to work and getting up and going in my car and driving to the workplace was a joy. Because I knew that the people there at the workplace, they were humble, they were godly. Maybe that's you in your workplace. You know that going to work is such a joy. It's like, I'm so happy I get to go there because my leader he's humble, he's godly. Some of you may have an opposite experience. That going to work is dreadful because your leader is heavy-handed, mean-spirited, arrogant, or he's proud. You long for a perfect leader. In our homes, as parents, poor leadership can result in a home that lacks joy. Experience tells us that we want perfect leaders. This is a room full of leaders. Leaders want to be led. But if we think that human leaders are going to bring us joy, we will be disappointed because no human leader is perfect. Sometimes they're wrong in their judgments. Sometimes their standards of right and wrong are flawed. Not so with King Jesus. He rules a kingdom with perfect righteousness and with perfect justice. Always. Endless, perfect leadership. And so the way God gives us joy, He says, I'm going to give you a right leader who's going to rule perfectly the way that you desire in your life. Here's how this connects to you and I right now today. When events and circumstances in our life that tempt us to become anxious, when we have things in our life that we say, it feels as if it's unclear in the future. How is this going to work out? Things are out of control. And we're tempted in those moments to grab control ourselves, to be our own leader. That is a time for us to grab hold of the leadership of King Jesus, who rules perfectly with justice and with righteousness. His leadership in your life gives you stability. It gives you security when things don't go according to your plan or according to my plan. And so we never have to question His leadership, to know that what He allows in our life comes from Him, and actually that He knows the way out of those things. And so for them, they were going through a difficult time. Israel was going to go through this season of being in exile. Don't you think they needed to be reminded that there is a God who is sovereign and in control, and He is the perfect leader, and He brings perfect peace. In your life right now, if you're going through a season when your joy just feels zapped, it's gone, It's a time for you to embrace the reality that in Jesus is all that you desire. This child who has come. And it is His peace. It is His leadership. And He eagerly wants to give you that joy that comes from His peace. Peace with God. And a leadership that says He knows what He's doing in your life. That is where joy comes from. And in the book of Haggai, there's this great prophecy about Jesus that says He is the desire of the nations. Is He your desire? At the end of the day, when you think about what you want most in life, is it this child who has perfect peace and perfect leadership in your life? All that we long for, all that we want is wrapped up and found at Christmas. True joy, lasting peace, perfect leadership. This is the gift of God. He says, I want to give this to you in your life. Children who are here with us this morning. Tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up, my children wake up with a lot of gifts under our tree. If you're a child this morning and you're here and you're excited about that, you should be excited about that. Let me encourage you, seek a different, better gift. Don't be satisfied with those gifts that are wrapped under your tree if you're a child. Look for the greater gift of Jesus in your life. Parents and grandparents, let us not lose an opportunity to point our children to the greater gift of Jesus. That gift will last forever. Never wear out. Durable. Desirous. He is what we really want. Let's pray together. Father, on this Christmas Eve morning, we are thankful for the opportunity to be here this morning, to be reminded of the reality that you desire our joy. And so I thank you that this morning we can come and worship you and adore you. I pray that you fill us with thankfulness for what we have in Jesus. That which we can never receive on our own, that which we can't work for or earn, have not deserved, and yet you have given us this gift of joy wrapped up in this little baby. And so for those here this morning that are going through a time in their life where it is upheaval, where things in their life don't feel as if it's very peaceful or calm, I pray that you fill them with the reality that you have perfect peace and restored relationship with their Creator. For those this morning who are going through a season of life where their future is unclear, where things have happened these past few days, these past months, in which it feels as if it's very shaky and unstable, I pray that they would cling to your leadership in their life, that you know what's going on in their life. Thank you for Christmas, for the reality that we can spend just a few weeks focusing on the reality of the Incarnation. We worship you this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.